Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. This is my monthly Q&A for May 2022. So if you want to see my answers to some of your questions, please stay tuned. I am really excited that I can share some of my answers to your questions. I typically do this video at the end of every month. So today is May 31st, and so this video is going to go up at some point today. I had planned to do one at the end of April, but I was sort of in a funk and I wasn't really making videos. And then I didn't have a lot of questions for the month of April. So this is kind of my April and May questions put together. So, but I'm really happy that you guys hooked me up. I got a lot of questions to answer, so let's get started with that. My first set of questions was about the Trip Around the World quilt. I have one of the blocks here, and to be honest, I've only made 2 blocks. I made one for practice and then one on a video, a live video. I'll link that video in the description. And hopefully you can go back to it when you have some time. I have a desire to go live in the future. I will let you know ahead of time when I want to do that. So I have 3 questions related to the Trip Around the World quilt. The first one is, when I sewed the strip sets together, did I sew them all in the same direction or did I alternate seams? And I have one of the strip sets here, and I like to alternate the seams. I have not tried it, sewing all of them in the same direction, because I read or heard or saw that if you do that, it could cause the strips to sort of bow in the middle, so they kind of have a little arc in them. So I actually sew them, I alternate directions. So let me show you that here. I have, let's see, so this is my first. These are my first 2 strip sets, or 2 strips here, and you can see the top of these match up, but then the bottoms of the strips do not match up. And then when I sewed the 3rd strip, which is this white to the yellow, I started at this end. Okay, and then so if you go all the way down, you'll notice that throughout. So here I sewed these 2 together. But then when I went the other way to add the new one, these 2 are together. So I alternate directions when I sew a strip set. I have never tried it, sewing them in the same direction. I think I already said that. Just because of what I heard, this way always seems to work best for me. And when I did the Bargello, I actually did that same thing, but I had 14 strips in my strip set. So alternating works best for me. I know that some people can sew all of them together and not have bowing. I've only tried it this way to avoid that. Okay, the next question was, why did I choose to sew them in a tube? And I have sort of a way to explain that. First, let me go over what a tube is. A tube is when you take the strip set and you sew, let's see, this is my fabric 1 and fabric 7 is at the bottom, but where you sew them all together here. And so you have an enclosed tube. I have a quick video of me sewing one strip set into the tube. I'll insert it right here. It's super sped up, but you can see the process. And I'll go over why that's going to be important for my Trip Around the World quilt. And I'm actually going to use my my postage stamp block as kind of an example. So for this quilt, or for this block that's here behind me, I'm actually sewing individual squares together. And this is important it doesn't matter as much for this quilt because it's designed to be scrappy. So I don't need all of the pieces in a certain order. And I've just sewn, as I said, individual squares together. Now with my Trip Around the World block, let me put it up here. I'll put it above it. Okay. With my Trip Around the World quilt, you have the illusion of the squares, but I have a very particular order of my fabric. So this is always fabric 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the next row starts with fabric 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, and all the way down. And because I don't want to cut a ton of individual squares and have to put them in this order again, I sew them into a tube, and that way they're always in the same order. So no matter what stitches I rip out or whatever, they're always going to be in the same order. So even here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Going across and down. So I think that's important for the tube. It keeps all the strips in the same order without you having to cut a ton of individual squares and put them back together. This is also good for a bargello, and there are other tube quilts that you can put together, you know, to give the illusion of very small pieces, but the pieces are all in the same order, so it makes it easier to put together. Okay, and my last question about this quilt was, how did I cut the strip sets? And I have a quick little snippet of me putting those together. I should have brought the pieces over here, but all I did was used my shape cut ruler, and I laid it down, and I cut every 2.5 inches. So this quilt, it starts with 2.5 inch strips. And then for the strips, you're gonna cut 2.5, like for the strip sets, you just cut 2.5 inch pieces from that. And since I use 7 fabrics, you need 7 of these little strip units to make 1 block. Okay, and when I cut up my strip set, I actually got 16 blocks. So I'm going to be able to make 2 extra blocks, which will give my quilt a total of 16 blocks once I get everything put together. Okay, so I hope that answers your questions. If you have more questions about that, I'm going to link, I think I have a playlist for this maybe. If not, I will link just the individual videos so that you can go back and check them out for the Trip Around the World quilt. This is just one of my blocks. I think this quilt is going to be gorgeous once all of it is put together. All right, my next question is about the number of projects I work on at one time. It was basically, how do I do that? And I have a couple of ways that I do that. Also, sometimes I work on a lot of projects. Sometimes I only work on 1 or 2. It just kind of depends where I am and what needs to be done. Since I have several commission things that are going on, I try to put more emphasis on those. And so, like, even when I don't have a good sewing day, I try to at least work on my commissions. So that means right now I'm sewing more for those things than I am for myself, but I still try to work in time for my own projects that I love and just free sewing every once in a while. And the main way that I do that now is with the use of a timer. I just decided to set a timer for whatever I need to do for that day. Right now, it's like 30 minutes. So if I work on something for 30 minutes, then I feel like I've accomplished what I need to for the day. And then I can go to the next thing, whether it's working on YouTube or doing a little bit of sewing for myself, or, you know, just preparing different things. I have also in the past chosen days for specific projects. So I might say on Tuesday and Thursday, I work on my heart quilt. And then on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I might work on my Trip Around the World quilt. And then Saturday is for a free motion or for the long arm. Something like that, so that I can feel like I'm accomplishing a little bit without actually having to finish anything. I feel like if I can set the timer, then that can accomplish the goal once I work for that amount of time. And I know a lot of people have different ways of looking at that. So if you have tips, tricks for how to work on more than one project, leave them in the comments. Or if you prefer to just work on one thing all the way through to completion, that's great too. Let us know in the comments what you think, what works best for you. And I know, like, it depends. Sometimes I work on just one thing. Sometimes I'm working on a lot of things. It just depends for each person. My next question was about my last commission quilt. And they asked, how did I quilt it? I'm going to put just a little snippet of that finished quilt here in the video. It was a completely scrappy quilt with a ton of different blocks in it, and I chose to do the meander stitch. And so they asked if I used my domestic machine to quilt that, and the answer is yes. I did use my my domestic sewing machine to quilt that quilt, and I have my practice blocks. They're actually over there on the piano that I use to practice before actually going to the quilt. And I think that's a practice that I'm going to use from now on to before I go to free motion on that domestic machine. I also have a long arm. I'm still learning how to use it, but I'm just not there yet as far as quilting for other people. So that's in the works, hopefully very soon. But I did quilt that quilt on my domestic machine. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked about my memory pillows. I'm going to leave a link to, I have 2 videos for memory pillows. Leave that in the comments or in the description. And they asked about making a pillow out of a rash guard shirt. I will be completely honest. I had to look up what a rash guard shirt was. And it's basically, my understanding is like a swimming shirt. So I've never used that kind of, I've never made a pillow out of that. But what I think I would do for sure is go ahead and line it with some interfacing before stitching with it. And I'm going to add another thing. I think I would make sure to use batting as well behind that fabric to keep the pillow a little bit softer. I use the Pellon SK135 interfacing to line all of my pillows and bears and shirts. Like for quilts, whenever I'm lining shirts, I use that because it's lightweight and easy to sew through. So I would use that. I would make sure you definitely have to use a pressing cloth because I would be afraid to melt that fabric, I think is what my concern would be. But yeah, you could definitely, I think that you could make a pillow out of it. I would just be sure to line it first because I think it would make it a little bit easier to sew. The next question was about the memory bears. They asked, how do I add the collar to the bears? And I'll link that video in the description so that you can see how I do that. It's basically cutting the collar off ahead of time, measuring it, and then cutting and stitching and putting it back together on the bear. So, but the video will be linked. So if you are concerned about that, you have questions about that, check out the description box to get more information about that. She also asked how I added the buttons to the front of bears. And when I do that, I just use the pattern and I place the pattern piece along the buttons so that it can be included. And when I know I'm going to use buttons, I line the shirt with the buttons closed, and so that gives me one big piece of fabric to cut out for the pattern piece instead of trying to put it together as I'm stitching it. And I think that's a pretty good tip. So if you're going to use the buttons, just line that fabric with the buttons closed so you don't have to worry about taking it apart or putting it back together at the end. Let's see, anything else? Another question about the lining was concern about the Pellon interfacing not sticking. I did have that issue, and I messed up an iron or two trying to work with it. The main thing that I've been doing is just taking my time and using a damp pressing cloth to help with that. And then after I press the fabric and I hold it down for 15 seconds or whatever, I just count to 15 in my head. And then go to the next section. And then after I'm done with that piece, I actually move it over to the side so it can dry before I try to cut it out. So for me, that seems to help. If you have any tips about that, leave those in the comments. We definitely can help each other with that. And it's not always perfect, but usually it does enough so that I can still sew everything together. So, but I really had to go back and look at the directions. Fortunately, I have a lot of directions because I use a lot of Pellon paper. So just double check the directions, make sure that you're following them as accurately as you can. The damp pressing cloth really helps me to get a nice firm stick. It does take a lot of time to do it that way, but it's definitely worth it. Let's see, next question. So the next question is about my next commission quilt, and I showed you the last one, and I'm not gonna put a snippet of the current quilt, but it's the Flying Geese, so I'll link the video. And this week I have more details about that quilt, and you actually get to see it all laid out. But the question was, do I think it's okay to stitch in the ditch for hand piece quilts? And her concern is that the stitches may not be strong enough. The hand stitches might not be as strong as the machine stitches, which maybe could cause the stitches to come apart. So what I've done, this will be my third hand piece quilt that I've done for the same client, and the first two, I want to say it's the fourth, but maybe, no, it's the fourth. It's the fourth quilt, because I did the cat quilt, I did snail trail, and then I just did the scrappy one. So this is going to be the fourth quilt, and I actually quilted the cat quilt and the snail trail quilt in the ditch, and it seemed to work nicely. The stitches held, and if there was any point where I thought the stitches would not hold, I just kind of moved my my machine stitch over out of the ditch just a little bit, so that it would kind of cover it. But so far it has not been an issue, and the stitches seem to hold nicely. So and even for this next one, this Flying Geese, I think I'm gonna do a combination of in the ditch and some free motion. So you'll get to see that as I start putting that one together. But I think it's okay. Of course, you may want to, if you're gonna do that, just check all the, check your seams. If there's something that needs to be repaired, go ahead and repair it before you choose to stitch in the ditch. There wasn't anything that I needed to fix on the other quilts that I can remember. But it was, you know, it was a good learning experience, and now I have the experience both of stitching in the ditch and free motion on hand-pieced quilts. Okay, next question. So for these quilts, the client actually sent me the fabric for the backing and the binding, and they sent muslin every time. And so someone asked what the muslin was like as a backing fabric, and did I pre-wash the muslin. I did not pre-wash the muslin. I just went straight for it. I'm not sure if it's common practice to pre-wash. I have no idea. But from what I can tell, the muslin holds well. It seems to quilt very nicely, and I like that. I'm trying to think if I washed any of the quilts, and I think that the last one I washed it before I sent it back, and the muslin did fine in the wash as well. So for me, I think that it was a good idea to use for them to use the muslin as a backing fabric. It worked well, and it didn't. I was concerned about the fabrics bleeding onto it. I haven't had any of those issues either. So I hope that answers your question about the muslin as a backing fabric. Next question. I am currently working on my heartstrings quilt. I will put a picture of my progress here. As of today, I only have one more row to stitch together, and then I'm going to start doing the rows, stitching the rows together. And her question was, what is it like to paper piece and use the denim? I'm going to go upstairs and grab a row of the of that quilt, and I'll be right back to talk to you about it. I have my row of my heartstrings quilt, and so this is just one part of it, but I've grabbed it because I want you to see that I have some light string blocks and then some dark string blocks, and I just used copy paper to back these pieces. And when the person asked about denim, the only denim that I used doesn't have a paper back. So I just used it to make the half square triangles, and then I have the solid squares. So most of the denim doesn't have paper on it. My only regret really about this is that the copy paper is a little bit too thick or too hard or something, and so it's a challenge to take out. And maybe for some of it my stitch length isn't small enough, so I'm a little bit concerned about that. But I'm just gonna quilt it. I don't know how dense I'm gonna quilt it, but I'm gonna quilt it pretty close so that the stitches should hold nicely. I think it'll be okay, but I'm just concerned about taking this paper off, some of it, because of the way that how thick the paper is. And what I've been doing is on these, I didn't do it on this one, I need to, but once I have both sides of the fabric stitched, like on these half square triangles, I've taken the paper off of it. So hopefully I won't have as much to take off at the end. I'm trying to do it a little bit at a time where it, when all of it's sewn together. But even here, like right there, I'm a little bit concerned about my stitches, but I think it'll be okay. So I haven't, to answer the question, most of the denim doesn't have backing on it, and I didn't have to adjust my sewing machine. I haven't adjusted my sewing machine other than to make my stitch length just a little bit smaller as I'm stitching through the paper and as I'm sewing the rows together to hopefully keep those stitches a little tighter. Okay, the next question is about the heartstrings quilt. If there's a pattern available, I'm still working on the pattern right now, so it is not available yet, but I do have a pattern for my Pieces of My Heart quilt, which is sort of the inspiration for the heartstrings quilt. I'll link that in my Etsy shop in the description so that you can go check out the Pieces of My Heart quilt. That was a giant quilt that I made using crumb blocks and half square triangles to create the heart shape. So you can check that out. You can get the pattern if you're interested, but the heartstrings pattern is going to be just a little bit different, so I'm still working on that as I put the quilt together. All right, so let's see. Next is the next question is about the Moto scrap bag. I have made several quilts using Moto scrap bags, and basically what it is it's kind of a surprise when you get it. But Moto makes these little bags, and they're called the scrap bag. And when you open it, it's all strips of one fabric line, but you don't know exactly what you're gonna get. So one time I got one that had several selvages in it, and I cut a really thin strip of fabric to use. Another one I had like 3-inch pieces, but they were only like 20 inches long. And then for the Bargello, it was pretty similar. I had like 39 pieces, but they were not a full width of fabric. And they were about, I'm not sure how wide they were, but they, it was a one complete fabric line, which was awesome. But the cuts, you never really know what you're gonna get. And so the question about the Moto scrap bag is, where did I purchase mine from? And I've gotten some from quilt shops, but I've also found them on Amazon. When I got them on Amazon, they were, I think they came from Hancock's of Paducah by way of Amazon. So I would just look around and see where you can find them. I liked it best when I found them in a store because I could kind of see what the colors were before I picked it. But you can find them online. It's just kind of like a surprise, whatever you're gonna get. All right, that's a good question. Thank you for asking that question. My next question, the last two are sort of related, but I'm gonna answer them one at a time. The first question was, am I going to do a video every day for the month of July like I did last year? And the answer is yes. I think I've done Vlogmas in July for 3 years. I think I did it 19, 20, and 21. And so 2022 is not gonna be any different. I'm going to start on July 1st and release a video on every single day in the month of July. Sometimes they fall within my normal schedule of videos. Like for example, if it's a Wednesday, it's gonna be a Whip It Wednesday. If it's a Sunday, it's gonna be a tutorial. If it's a Friday, it's probably gonna be a UFO video. But in between those, there will be a new video every day. And so I would love your ideas about a topic that you would like me to cover or think about or look at for Vlogmas in July. It is usually a ton of fun. During that month, I've been super busy. This year, I don't think I'm going to be as busy as I've been during the month of July, so it's going to be a little bit easier to get the videos up, but it's still a fun process. I've enjoyed making those videos, and of course, this July is special because by the end of Vlogmas in July, I hope to be at my goal of 10,000 subscribers. So hopefully we can celebrate that on July 31st. Super excited about just the possibility of that. So I would love for you to join me on that journey. Again, if you have ideas for Vlogmas, let me know so that I can start working everything in and seeing how we can put all of our ideas together. The last question is about starching my fabric. Somebody asked if I starch my fabric before cutting it, and the answer is no, I do not. But I think this will be a great topic for Vlogmas in July, to starch some fabric and see how I like it compared to the way I normally do things. So if you have any tips, any tricks about starching, I've seen at least 2 different ways. Some people just starch it lightly and press it. I've seen some people completely saturate it, let it dry, and then press it the next day. So let me know if you're a starcher. Let me know in the comments what you prefer, and if you're interested in seeing that and seeing my perspective on that as a part of Vlogmas in July 2022. Okay, so that covers all the questions. Thank you guys so much for asking those questions. I hope that I've answered them well enough. Again, if you have more questions, leave them in the comments. I will try to answer it directly in your comment and answer it in the next Q&A video at the end of June. So let me know what your questions are, what your comments are. Please be sure, if you have input on other people's questions, leave those in the comments as well. Okay, thumbs up this video, share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already. You can subscribe by clicking my picture right there in the bottom right. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.